Welcome, everyone, to our first Friday in March. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing in a moment Paul Zonneveld, who is a personal friend of mine, one of my best friends, and someone who I admire and inspires me all the time. And it's just such a pleasure to have you here, Paul. And yes, we are both wearing pink shirts.
Hmm.
We discovered that just about 20 minutes ago. So I hope you enjoy that show. What we're going to do is I'm going to start with his bio, and then we're going to have an interview style presentation today. I have a number of questions I'd like to ask Paul about systemic intelligence and really tap into his wisdom. And we'll go for a while and then keep your questions at hand because we're going to give you a chance at the end for about 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, so first of all, Paul Zonneveld. I said that right, Paul?
Well pronounced. Very nice.
Good. Is an associate of Mobius Executive Leadership. He's based in Amsterdam and is a seasoned executive leadership facilitator, senior transformational faculty, and faculty for top team interventions. He has over 25 years of international business experience. His unique expertise in understanding complex system dynamics enables him to offer leaders insight on how to increase or to expand their impact. By increasing their systemic intelligence, sensibility, and effectiveness, leaders enable themselves to work with the deeper dynamics. As a leadership coach, Paul enables executives and senior leaders to reconnect with their internal leadership qualities, such as self and shadow awareness, courage, and balance. In addition to his leadership development work, Paul is the director of the Scientific Department for Systemic Intelligence in Organizations at Constellations International, promoting, advising, and teaching the systemic intelligence approach in many business organizations. He's presented his work at various national and international training institutes and business schools and on many continents and countries. He is also the co-author of Emergent, The Power of Systemic Intelligence to Navigate the Complexity of M&A. In this book, he describes how the integrator process works, enabling organizations to integrate their acquired businesses better, faster, and more sustainable for success.
So it's a little humbling as well to hear that.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot. You've done so much over
Hmm.
the years.
Yeah, it's you can see I've done a lot. Had the time for it. But, yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
All right, so let's jump in with a first question for you, Paul. You wrote this book called Emergent
Hmm.
that I think is a fabulous book, and I recommend that everybody on this call, order it and read it. It's about systemic intelligence and mergers and acquisitions. Now, we all know what mergers and acquisitions is, but what is systemic intelligence?
Well, to be very honest, it's a word that I invented. But systemic intelligence is a way now, a methodology to start looking and navigating into complexity and complex issues and complex situations in organizations. And it looks at the deeper patterns that are creating all kinds of symptoms on the surface. And it helps people to make invisible patterns that are running the show in organizations, to make them visible. And with that, it becomes a possibility to work with it. And eventually, what it helps to do, it helps to either reduce stagnation in collaboration, in creating good results together. So you also could say that it restores flow in organizations. And with flow comes joy, good collaboration, eventually also results. So it helps to resolve issues in the deeper layers of an organization.
There's a lot in there to unpack, and we're going to unpack it over the course of our time together. But my question for you is, what's different, or what are the differentiating factors between systemic intelligent work and other types of organizational development, organization change, organizational interventions? What's the difference?
I think the difference is, for one, it's very suited for complexity, and there are not many ways yet that have been developed for using it in complexity. And I'll make a distinction in a moment about complexity and complicated, which is more linear way of working. And what it also does, it really looks at organizational development and organizational transformation, both from a human perspective, but also what is really happening in the organization and how is that in combination with the human perspective acting inside and outside each other. So we're talking, for example, when we talk about transformation, we also look at grieving. We also look at a phase of not knowing. So it's not that every step is automatically happens on the surface, but we're looking at, okay, what is happening both in the people, but also in the organizational departments at the deeper level, and what are the little things we can do to have deep effect?
Say more about that last piece, little things we can do to have greater effect. What do you mean by that?
When we find the deeper patterns in the organization, we don't need to do a lot of interventions. And let me describe it like this. Everything that is on the surface, everything we can measure, like health rate or sick rate, whatever you from which side you look at it, but also financial success, also happiness and satisfactory of employees in an organization. All those outcomes to us are symptoms of something that happens at a deeper level.
Right.
And if we can find those patterns, because it happens in complexity, it means that everything is connected with each other. And it means that if we only nudge the system a little bit, that whole system starts to find a new equilibrium that contains a little bit more flow or an easier way of working. And a lot of those symptoms on the surface start to disappear just by one intervention. So we don't need to fight all those all those symptoms at the surface.
So you're really at the source.
Yeah.
You're at the source code of what's happening in the organization. Therefore, less needs to be done to impact a greater amount on top.
Wonderful summary. Thank you.
So, you talk a lot in your book and since I've known you about organizations as living systems.
Yeah.
Which brings about complexity. So you use these words a lot, living systems, complexity. You also use the word pattern, which we'll talk about later. But what do you mean by living systems and that bringing about complexity?
When we look at an organization as a living system, and just imagine that we have organizations that have survived for over 100 years. And that organizational system, although it can change and it can adopt its purpose to the situation and to the times at hand, that organizational system just continues over more than 100 years. It's always there longer than anybody who works there.
Right.
So it almost has a mind of its own. It has and we would even say it has a soul. And so that organizational system is a living thing in itself. And then it contracts with employees to work together to fulfill a certain purpose. Where they meet each other is where the complexity starts to come in. And when you realize that many, also in team coaching, I've once been caught saying that as soon as people walk into the door, complexity follows. When you think about, for example, team coaching, team coaching can be about the leader, that the leader is doing something that is not helpful to the whole team. But as normally in a team, everybody interacts with each other. It could also be that, a subsystem in the team is disrupting the rest of the team. But also, as a team is part of the larger whole of an organization, it could be that a disruption in the board shows its symptoms only in another team.
Right.
So it is all so interconnected that it's not always very helpful to look at what is happening at the surface, because if the team is the symptom carrier of the board or the dysfunction in the board, then it doesn't help if we start to fight the symptoms of how the team is showing it. Then we have to go A, to the board, and B, try to find a pattern that is holding them hostage almost.
All right. So I was going to ask you another question, but I'm curious about what you just said. You've been using this word pattern.
Yeah.
Tell us more about patterns. What kinds of patterns are you looking for?
Actually, I'm not looking for patterns. I love to find them. But what I'm looking for and how we work is that we navigate in the complexity. And although complexity is everything is connected in complexity. One thing moves and then something else responds somewhere else. And we never know how that response will be. So we navigate in complexity with 4 principles. And we found 4 key principles that help us to take those symptoms, and almost those 4 principles work like a sieve almost, to start to find where in one of those principles, we find some stagnation, and that's where we find the patterns. And I think we're going to hand out the chapter 4 of the book where a lot of these navigating principles, those 4, are being explained. So I'll just give them quickly to you. One is purpose. Every system that is man-made needs a purpose. Second is connection and inclusion. So who belongs to the system and what are the boundaries? And the third one is order and taking your place, which is about the structure in the organization and about responsibility of task. And the fourth one is about exchange. That's actually about the vitality in the system. Well, if there is a difficulty in the connection, we might find a pattern that's called exclusion. We might also find in a different situation, I've seen that, for example, in a banking company, a financial company, where in their meetings they were over-including. That also is a pattern. And you saw that happening in every meeting that they had, that there was an inner circle of the people who had to be there because they were working on a certain topic. And there was an outer circle where all the managers of those people were sitting in. Highly dysfunctional. And the people were complaining about the fact that they had so much work to do. Well, if you are sitting in all kinds of meetings of other people that you don't need to do anything with, and you have your own people, well, or your own meetings, no wonder you're overworked. So over-including is also a pattern. We see patterns where people work, try to do it for somebody else. You know, when somebody leaves a place open and they jump in and they are going to do 2 roles, most of the time one of the roles is going to be ineffective. So there's a lot of different patterns that we can find, but based always connected to those 4 principles. And then we have an entry to start looking there and start maybe doing our first nudge and see how the system responds.
Could you just repeat those 4 principles once again? I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah. So we have purpose, which sets the direction, and purpose is an outside-in request of, say, the environment of an organization of what to offer them. Connection and inclusion is about belonging. Order and place is about structure and responsibility.
Yeah.
And exchange is about the vitality of an organization. How do we balance the give and take over time? Talks about the vitality.
Great, thank you. And your chapter covers that really nicely for those of you who want to dig a little deeper into the principles and understand them. Great. So back several years ago, I attended one of your workshops in Amsterdam, Paul, and I love the week I spent with you and Mika Jacobs, and learned a lot about systemic intelligence, constellations, both organizationally and family, and was absolutely surprised at the impact your work had on my life, my personal life. It was transformational. My question for you and for everybody here on the call is, how do you do systemic intelligence work? Like, give us the how. How is this done? I think that would be really helpful.
Well, first of all, what we do is when we get a request from a client and they come up with a problem, the first thing we do is we try to define what is the relevant system for the issue at hand. And we do that by widening our scope, both horizontally. So let's say there is a team with a problem. The first thing we do is widen our scope. How is the team embedded in the other teams that they are working together or they have to work together with? Also, we look up and we look down. How is the relationship with the teams or the levels up there? And how is the relationship with the levels below? And we look in the time scale. What has happened to this team in the past? When there was a leader change, how did the previous leader leave? So we look at different levels and we widen our scope. And then eventually we'll have an idea of what is the relevant system. That means who are involved in trying to solve this problem. And most of the time when we widen our scope, we already get some good ideas about that. So that is one. Then we do interviews, and we only interview for facts. Not that we don't listen to the emotion, but, and it sounds a little bit plain, maybe, or cold, but we need facts because the facts tell the real story. And we're not really interested in the story that the people tell us, because if the story was the solution, they would have already solved it by the story.
That's right.
So we have the relevant system, we have the interview, and then what we map the system. So we look at what are the key patterns, key elements, and then we create a map. And a map can be anything. You know, I work a lot when I work online. I've got these wooden things with which I constellate. I put them in relation to each other with my client to create a map of how do the key elements relate with each other. You can also draw a map. And the ultimate way of creating a map is what you just mentioned, creating a constellation with living people. And then, you know, there's a little pixie dust coming down then, and a little magic happening, that these people that we place in spots placed by the client, they will start giving information about how the relationships and where the tension is in the system. And once we have the tension, we can name the pattern, and then we can just poof, nudge the pattern just a little bit. One of the most used interventions that we have is just naming what we see. Because when you observe a team, you can already, if you listen, and you have to listen differently, you don't have to listen for what they're saying, they have to take everything literally. And then they will tell you the patterns without noticing that they're just telling you the pattern. So it's also using a different eye in the mapping the system, getting curious about the relationships when you map that. And once you have found the pattern or a pattern, sometimes you find 3 patterns, but you can just sense which one is most heaviest. It's either we're looking for the highest tension in the system, or we look for the hole where all the energy drops away. And then we do what we nudge it, but we actually, what you could call it, it's a test. So we do something like that's called safe to fail experiment. And there has been writings about that. It's an experiment or a test that you do at the edge of the system. So that you don't disrupt the whole system, but you just do a test and see if that works. And when it works at the edge, you start to bring it to the center. So, and because it is complexity, you can't do a 10-step plan. That works in complicated situations, and the Cynefin model is a beautiful model to look into that. What is the difference between complicated and complex? In complexity, you can only work with a 1-step plan. And then you reorient again, how did the whole system, like a mobile over a baby's bed, how did it land? And then you can see, okay, and if there is a second nudge needed, how do we do that again? And that's another 1-step. David White wrote a beautiful poem about take the first step, not the second or the third. Well, that's in our book on the very first page, because that is the methodology almost. Take just 1 step and see how the system resolves its issue.
I love what you just talked about. I love your methodology. And I really appreciate the distinction between complicated and complex.
And it's so needed.
It's so needed because we tend to layer on these linear structured plans into organizational change when we're dealing with very complex environments, thinking we're dealing with something complicated, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It might worsen the problem, or it might create repeating problems because you don't really solve something. And that is one of the dangers of using, say, the tools of the complicated world, the analytical tools, in complexity. The other biggest problem in working with complexity is simplify it. Because complexity is complex, it's not simple.
That's right.
And that's another one there where leaders sometimes love to simplify something. Oh, it's not that complex. Well, if you start to become honest, then you can use and work with complexity. If you make it too simple, it's not really helpful.
Okay. I have one final question, and then we'll have time to open it up for questions from everybody else. My last question, Paul, is, so this is all fascinating, but what results do you produce? And what results, not but, and what results do you produce from this type of work?
Well, eventually, when you help to resolve stagnation in an organizational system, or you help to recreate some more flow in the system, that means that all the levers are going to be going towards the positive. So whatever the stagnation creates, we help to dissolve that. It could be better cooperation, that could be more joy in the organization, that could be solving the problem at the right level, at the right depth or the right place. Like if the board is the issue, don't start training the employees or don't start training the team, go to the board. So it helps to find the right level where the intervention will work, and it helps to create more flow, less stagnation, and I would say more flow is more joy in the organization, and all of that means that people bring more of their capacities into the system.
Got it.
So that's the simple thing we do.
I'd love to open it up for questions.
Could I ask my question first, if that's okay?
Yeah, please, Janice, go.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious, Paul, if it is the board, right, and the board seems stuck in its ways and not seeing that they're the cause and or part of the complexifying the system, is there another way around it? In other words, if you look into the system, if you look into the organization as a whole, keeping the board on the side, can you add greater flow so that it decreasing the noise of other complexity in the system to make it more obvious that the loud gong noise is out of the board? Because if you have a whole symphony of noise around you, it's hard for everybody, including the gong itself, to know that it's the problem. So if you can, what do you think about adding flow to other parts of the system so that it's obvious to the people who might be causing issues?
Sometimes that's possible. Very often we found that is not possible because the team that is, or the teams that are inflicted because of the board not taking their responsibilities or not updating the purpose because the previous purpose has been either fulfilled or is dying away. What we do though is engage in a conversation of where else do they see similar issues, and how does that connect, and where does that connect eventually? Where does it come together? And then it helps to have those conversations for them to, and we also use some different questions most of the time with them in our conversations to let them think about it differently. So simple questions also, since when did this start and what's changed in the organization when that started? We've had all kinds of situations where leaders are being replaced for could be very good reasons, like they've done their term and they move along. But if you don't say goodbye to a leader in a proper way, that might create a stagnation in the flow. And if you can connect those issues, like the issue happened then, and hey, what else happened around that same time? We find that people are willing to really start to dig into that. And additionally, this way of working is a non-blaming way of working.
Right.
And I think that is for anybody who is part of the entanglement of the problem, is a very nice way of looking at it, because we're not blaming it's your fault or it's your fault. We look at, hey, this pattern has evolved. And apparently this pattern has evolved in your team. And it was an invisible pattern. So how can you blame people when there is an invisible pattern? And we try to help them to see it. And once they can see it, they're willing to look at it. In most of the cases. There is always, but then most of the time, if they don't want to see it, they don't even talk to us. unfortunately, sometimes. Yeah, that's also life. We're not being requested always.
I have a question, Paul. This is very, very interesting, and I'm looking forward to
Right.
reading chapter 4 and getting your book. My question is, and I know this is a team coaching group, but oftentimes situations in organizations are because of the leader. Something's going on with the leader that's creating, some of the challenges. And does your process doing this on a team basis, do you also use it and apply it to leaders? Because leaders, we are in a VUCA environment, and we're constantly going to be in a VUCA environment.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing when I'm working with leaders is oftentimes something's going on. They have patterns of what they're doing that's causing them not to think systemically, holistically.
Yeah.
So I think you nodded yes. The same process we use with a team, we do that with an individual leader.
Yeah, we can. And we also we make a differentiation between is something from the individual, and then we start looking if the person allows to start looking in their family system. What kind of traits have they learned in their survival in the family system that they are bringing into the organization and are following them around the organization? That's one. We also look at, is it from a larger group of people? It could be a team, could be a department, or is it from the system itself that is trying to survive and has created entanglement? So we make that differentiation. We can work with leaders also because sometimes leaders get themselves into a place. To give you an example, I once had a situation with a company where in 5 years they had 3 CEOs. And on face value, all 3 CEOs were very qualified to lead this company. What had happened is that the last one who was successful had brought one part of the company up and made it very successful. And then some other company bought them, and they asked the CEO to immediately leave, gave them a bonus, fine, go, and never come back again. That left a ghost in the system because the company hadn't been able to say a proper goodbye or to cut the umbilical cord with that CEO. So every next CEO who came in had no chance.
Right.
Because that seat was still occupied by the previous one in the mindset, and not even conscious. That's the thing. Very often it's not even visible or conscious. So we help them to realize, hey, that one was still functioning. So it's not your fault. You just came into a place that was all still occupied. So you could have done anything, and most of them did everything that you could in the book was possible. So helping them to see that as well, and helping companies also to see how do you make sure that either when you stop a team, how do you conclude that well so you don't have ghosts in the system. So yes, we can work with individuals if they want to. And most of the time in my executive coaching, this is always part. I tell them I can work with you on tips and tricks, which you probably can also get from a book. I can work with you on your personal belief system and your mindset. And I can work with you at the deepest level that I know, which is the level of the soul, and how you are doing things from there. And most of the time, they like to go deep, so we choose the last one, which makes it very, very quick and very effective.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Paul.
Aaron, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I've worked on a lot of M&A projects over the years.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just not very good at doing it, but about 20% of them I get called in on the front end, and I'll often say, what's the culture of the organization? What similarities? What can you leverage and things? And most of it falls on deaf ears.
Yeah.
But it has some impact, right? The 80% of the projects that I work on, it's in flight and it's already in trouble. They're replacing after the merger. People have left. They didn't realize they left. Sounds like what's going on in Washington. There are big holes. Things are missing. There's scrambling. People are demotivated. The energy drains from the organization. So when do you normally get engaged with these companies? Because those two entry points are so dramatically different.
Yeah. Well, we would love to be engaged at the front end because a friend of mine once, when I shared with her what we do, she said, what you do is you create the energetic blueprint of each of the parties.
Yeah.
And then you bring them together. And already by asking both parties one question per principle gives so much insight of where they can clash, where they can work together, where they can build on each other. If they have different criteria for order, how they create the order, that can already spook one party. So we'd like to be on the front end because we can help them to make the right decision. Most of the time, we have one client that is a consultancy company, and it is buying smaller consultancy companies, and they bring us in as soon as they have the okay of the acquisition. And then we are asked to work with the top team of both companies to start working on that integration of the teams and the people. And that is a happy place to work.
Yeah.
Because then we can help them to see their possible pitfalls and also do something about some leadership development.
Right.
Once they have moved onward, it becomes a little bit more difficult to help them. But because we work at the pattern level, we don't have to blame any people, so we can see sometimes why people had to leave, and then share that with the management of the company, so that they can take better measures.
Just one thing I wanted to share is when I'm actually engaging with a company in the early stage, I ask them two questions. So if we looked at change, are you a trailblazer? Are you fast followers? Do you follow in the middle? Are you very reluctant on that end? And I can get from executives and other people a pretty good reading as to where their company profile is.
Mm-hmm.
Then I look at the second company that's being acquired or the acquirer, and I ask the same question. And usually there's an immediate mismatch on those criteria, which inherently is going to create enormous problems.
Yeah.
And then the second question I ask is, tell me about your last 2 or 3 change initiatives. And I'm talking about things that fundamentally change the way in which you do business, not small, not projects, but initiatives, digital transformations. So they'll describe it and I'll say to them, how successful was it? And then I can ask them, why do you think it didn't work?
Yeah.
And those 2 questions are enormous litmus tests for me, because you're not asking hypothetical questions, and they're describing the problems. And some people will blame. Some will make it complexity. There are patterns that I can see in those.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's helpful for me. I would love to be, like you said at the beginning, if you can get in and build that blueprint, I mean, so much could be accomplished.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very similar way with those questions, and I love what your questions. I love those. So if I can copy and steal them a little bit.
Sure.
Questions that we ask in the beginning is, what is the purpose of this company? And we explain a little bit about the purpose. We ask them, what do you need to do to belong in your system, which gives them the connection part. Then we ask them, what are your criteria for order at peer levels? So is it how many years you're in the company? Is it how innovative you are? What is it? And recently we had some company, the eloquence of how you speak was a criteria for order. Never heard it before. It was amazing. And the fourth question is, where is the energy currently leaking in your organization?
I like that one.
And those 4, then they start to share the answers. So they do it in their own teams.
Yep.
And then they start to share those answers, and that gives them light bulbs after light bulbs. So it's a little bit, it's similar to what you do, Gary. It's just different questions. But
get them talking, right? Get them revealing that stuff. I like your last question a lot. Where's it leaking now?
Yeah.
I just want to take a moment, Paul, and say thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's
thank
good to
you.
be in pink together.
Good to be in pink together, my brother. It was fun. It was really fun having you today, and I really appreciate your wisdom and your experience, and you taking the time to share with us all the things that you've learned and to do the magical work that you do. So thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. And as I've been learning from you about team coaching many, many years ago, it's just a nice way how we dance together.
Yeah,
Like we really did the very first time we met.
we really did dance together the first time we met,
Absolutely, like crazy.
like crazy.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.